morning to all the colleagues from STADIO across the various campuses, as well as to any guests. So as Divya indicated, my name is Whitty Green from the CHE. And I'm sure everyone knows the CHE. Hopefully you don't have the picture of the CHE as the terrible policeman in your head, but the CHE as a partner organization trying to work with the sector to strengthen and build a higher education in the country. Certainly that is what we're seeking to do, and especially in terms of working with the private higher education sector, and working with the private higher education sector in a way that is equal to how the emphasis has been placed on the public higher education sector up to now. So we're really seeking over the last few years and going forward to strengthen our relationships with STADIO, the other private higher education institutions and the sector as a whole. The CHE celebrates 25 years of existence this year. It's its 25th anniversary. It was established in 1998 after the promulgation of the Higher Education Act of 1997, which sets up the possibility of the establishment of a CHE, Council on Higher Education. In fact, Chapter 2 of the Higher Education Act, after the glossary, is basically about the Council on Higher Education, its mandate, its structure, its purpose, and its function in the higher education space. And I think if colleagues haven't kind of engaged the Higher Education Act, really useful to do so, because I think it does provide us with a really broad overview of how we're needing to be working together in the sector. We are actually celebrating our 25th anniversary dinner tomorrow evening. There's a council meeting tomorrow and then a dinner in the evening where we celebrate the 25th anniversary. But we're also launching the new quality assurance framework at that dinner tomorrow. And the new quality assurance framework positions the CHE to work in a very, very different way with the sector. Seeking to partner, seeking to collaborate, seeking to build trust, seeking to hand over responsibility where there's evidence for quality, rather than the CHE as being this watchdog, this policeman in the sector that's kind of seen to be someone or some organization that you need to comply with, and compliance often then becomes a kind of tick box approach to meeting a particular requirements. So really looking forward to engaging with STADIO as we move into the context of the new QAF. So my brief reflection today is on the topic of digital advances and some considerations for teaching and learning, and then posing the question, how are we responding? Are we sinking or are we swimming? Are we surfing the wave? So there's a range of elements, a range of issues that we are engaging with at the national level, and I'm sure as well with STADIO at the institutional level. Developments over the recent years that really are taking a lot of our attention and have garnered a lot of interest. The issue of artificial intelligence bubbling under for many years. We spoke about the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence as being a central component of that, but really came to the fore at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, with the big emergence of generative AI and applications like ChatGPT that kind of just came in and took the higher education sector by storm and made us stand up and take notice of this issue around artificial intelligence. Online and blended learning as well, we've been thinking about it, working with it, some institutions have been exploring it, but COVID-19 really gave it impetus. And many institutions jumped into the online space by force rather than by choice through the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions. But then over time have started to build a strength and a capacity in that space. And it seems like for many of our institutions, it's going to be part of how we work in higher education going forward. It's interesting that jolts come into the system and they push us in particular directions. The jolt of generative AI, the jolt of COVID-19, And so in a sense, we have to think about that, how we react to crises rather than be proactive in how we anticipate things that are on the horizon. The other issue that is emerging quite strongly is the issue of micro-credentials. A different way of recognizing learning, in addition to how we recognize and how we credential through formal qualifications. Right? And this is also a massive movement across the world. How can we take advantage of the potential of micro-credentials in higher education? And how can we create parallels and synergies between the learning opportunities that are becoming available through micro-credentials and the formal qualifications that we offer in our institutions is a key question. So at national level, we are engaging with this issue on artificial intelligence. Colleagues might know that the CHE recently had a colloquium on artificial intelligence, a really useful one where we explored the range of dimensions around the issue. There is a report on that colloquium, but there is a call for papers that has emerged out of that colloquium. So any colleagues who are interested in this area, the CHE is going to be publishing edition of its in-house journal, Kagisano, focused specifically on artificial intelligence. And you just check the CHE website, you'll be able to find a call if anyone is interested in submitting a paper in that regard. These conversations will continue. We are engaging with the University of Johannesburg, the SARTU Chair on Higher Education, Teaching and Learning. And over next year, we'll have a series of webinars / seminars on artificial intelligence, honing in on specific aspects of it. There has to be a national response in addition to institutional responses. We have to work together in this space if we're going to make sense of it. Online and blended learning. Colleagues will know that CHE has accredited your programs either in the contact mode or in the distance mode. That's the kind of two modalities that have been historically in place over time. The terrain has changed, and I think we have to recognize that. And so at the moment, we have a task team in place. This task team is looking at building a set of standards around modes of provisioning, and we'll use those sets of standards to engage individual institutions who would like to work in different ways around teaching and learning modalities going forward. And so if STADIO or any other institution wanted to reconsider its modalities of delivery, to participate in a review based on those standards so that those modalities can then be enabled at the institution. So that'll be a big part of the work going forward. And then this issue of micro-credentials, we've just embarked on a project. It's been supported by the European Union through the Capacity Building and Higher Education Program. And it's a project to develop a regulatory framework for micro-credentials in higher education, so that we understand how we can, and when I say regulatory, I mean an enabling a regulatory framework that both takes advantage of the opportunities, but also takes cognizance of the potential threats and how we mitigate those threats going forward. For us in South Africa, these developments in higher education relating to technology have to be viewed through multiple lenses. And I think Divya indicated, that there's trepidation, there's excitement, there's concern, there's opportunity, there's threat. And so we have to engage these in thoughtful ways. And we have to use a range of lenses to engage these. And some of the lenses that we're going to have to think about is the lens of responsiveness. So how do we respond as institutions and as a sector? How do we respond to the workplace and as the workplace is evolving in relation to these digital advances through our programs and qualifications? How do we respond in ways that take into cognizance our understanding of higher education as higher education for the public good, including higher education for development of the economy and the development of society, in order that we avoid an instrumentalist approach, a technicist approach to higher education, which certainly has to play a much bigger role than that in the South African context. We have to take account of issues of quality. So as we embrace online and blended learning, are we building the capacity of our students to take up those opportunities? Are we building the capacity of our lecturers to work in an online and blended learning modality? We have to take account of social justice issues. And again, Divya did mention some of those in her introduction, and really useful that that study picks these up. The fact that we have a very unequal society. South African society, as we all know, is the most unequal in the world. And as we embrace digital technologies, who gains access and who doesn't, who is included and who is excluded, has to be at the center of our thinking. If we're not going to be entrenching inequality further in the South African context, we have to think about issues of capacity, issues of ability to embrace, issues like funding for this, both funding for students, funding for the teaching and learning programs, and so on. And then the issue of ethics becomes really important. There's a range of ethical issues to consider here. And I want to talk to a bit of them later on in the presentation. The study that STADIO did, I think, is a really interesting one. And it rubs up well against a study that the CHE had commissioned about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And there is a report on it, a survey, a student survey on access to and use of learning materials, with a particular focus on access to and use of learning materials during COVID-19. And it picked up on very much the same themes that the STADIO study picked up on. And it might be useful, Divya, to rub up your results against those results as a comparison. And when I was listening to what you're saying, your students are not very different from those students in the public higher education sector in relation to some of these broad trends that we are observing. There's also an additional study that followed up on that one, which was staff perspectives on the futures of teaching and learning post-pandemic, and picked up on very much the same themes. And so I think those two studies form a rich kind of rub-up against the study of STADIO. Colleagues, are we sinking or are we surfing the wave as these digital advances come to the fore and as we grapple with them? And I'm sure some of us can identify with various positions in relation to this. You know, I think for many people there's a feeling of just being overwhelmed, things just coming at you all the time. Limited support at your institution, limited support for students, limited knowledge, limited access to knowledge, and no resources. There are groups of people who just kind of are saying, okay, let's ride this out, we'll bide time. You know, these fads come and go, they've been coming and going for a long time. I'll just carry on as normal and check out what happens. You know? There are those who are taking instruction. My head of department says we need to move in this direction. Let me go with the flow. Let me take instruction. Let me just do what's expected of me. So I'm engaging technically. There are those who are engaging intellectually, who are seeing the opportunity, who are seeing the threats, who are kind of minds on in this, doing some background reading, thinking about the possibilities, starting to explore how to incorporate this in teaching and learning modalities, starting to capacitate themselves, swimming, as it were. And then there are those that are surfing the wave, leading, innovating, searching for new possibilities as we embrace, as we look at these new technologies. So I'm going to stop there and ask you, where are you? Let's take a quick mentiCom.com survey. You can just take a photo of that and take a vote. Okay, so AI in higher education, and I'm going to shift my focus just to a focus on AI, online learning, micro-credentials. We can pick up in other conversations and maybe in some of the questions if you like. But AI has really come to the fore over the last few years in higher education. And it's not a new thing. There have been multiple applications already that are underpinned by AI, and maybe many of us not really realizing that. things like text generation, text prediction, text translation, audio to text transcriptions, image manipulation. I mean, there's many texts and images coming onto your phones daily now, and you question, are these generated by people, or are they generated by machines, robots? Slide generation, audio and music generation, and so on. A range of applications. I want to hone in on generative AI. So generative artificial intelligence, which is a type of artificial intelligence that creates data, generates data, using large language models that have been collected over time and used to train the application. And ChatGPT is one example of this, but there's a whole range of others, Bard and so on, that have come to the fore. And then they use this database. I don't know if you can call it knowledge. You know, it's kind of, I have a question whether that content is knowledge that is underpinning the model. You know, for me, knowledge is something much more. It's active rather than just content displayed there. But anyway, be that it may, it uses this knowledge, generates learning patterns, and generates new inputs based on this. And I'm sure all of us have used this application now, and very convincing text comes from it. Our conversations have very much been focused on the interlinkage between generative AI and academic integrity. And that's where the concern has been for higher education, many people in higher education. So how do we maintain academic integrity in higher education in the context of generative AI? And there's been a range of organizations. I mean, I'm sure you know about the Global Academic Integrity Network, GAIN, that's been set up, that's interacting globally with this issue of academic integrity and the issue of artificial intelligence. And so a useful definition then of academic integrity, and I think one that's not really widely known or widely used, and people tend to work from the gut feel about what academic integrity is. Academic integrity is not about, is about not copying, or academic integrity is about not plagiarizing, you know? And I think there's a much more deeper meaning to academic integrity in higher education, and often linked to this notion of 6 fundamental values. It is about honesty, right? And honesty, therefore, meaning you wouldn't want to copy, you wouldn't want to plagiarize, you wouldn't want to represent academic work as your own work if it's not your own work, is an important element of academic integrity. But there are also other components of this notion, including trust, including fairness, including respect, including responsibility, including courage. And often we tend to work at the honesty level, and we expect honesty, and our knee-jerk responsibility to cases where there appear to be lack of honesty is a response that often doesn't treat fairly or doesn't convey a sense of trust. So for example, and I'll give you a couple of examples as I go along in the slide. There's a suspicion of a student copying. The knee-jerk reaction is a disciplinary procedure. Right? So all the other issues relating to academic integrity don't enter into the conversation. An understanding of the context, an understanding of the reasons leading to that copying, an understanding of, is it actually copying? If we want to prevent people from copying, we're putting in these massive surveillance systems that track facial movements and all kinds of things. Not exploring further, what does this do to trust? What does this do to relationship? Are those machines that we are trusting to do this work actually capable of doing that work in an unbiased fashion? And then there's been a lot of studies that have already shown the biased nature of those surveillance instruments in relation to different kinds of students. So academic integrity needs to be explored in this much more broader way than just this issue of surveillance, dishonesty, and mistrust. So how do we respond in the context of this rapidly emerging technology, these new technologies that students have at their disposal, and the threat, the perceived threat to academic integrity? And colleagues Lodge, Howard, and Broadbent have indicated or kind of based some research work and distilled these 6 responses that are being seen across the sector in relation to this, and particularly in relation to generative AI and applications like ChatGPT. So there's a sense maybe of ignore and hope it goes away. It's a short-term thing. There's a sense of we have to ban it. And some institutions have taken on, and some very prestigious institutions have actually taken this route. Ban these applications completely from the context, from their websites, track their use in students and so on. Some institutions, some academics have gone the invigilation route. Let's invigilate strongly. All our examinations, all our assessments have to be invigilated if we're going to be kind of sure that it is students' work. And we've actually seen a backtrack from online learning, online and blended learning, and assessments online. People have said, no, we're not assessing online anymore, right back to the halls, bring the students physically, let's assess in our physical spaces. It's the only way we can control this. There are responses that embrace the phenomenon and start to look at ways of working with it. There are responses that design around it, right? So let's recognize ChatGPT is here. A student can use that ChatGPT to generate a very convincing piece of writing or very convincing output. Let's develop assessments that look beyond that and outside of that.